Chairman, this is a hearing important to me. I've been here a little over a year and a half, and I probably had more input from constituents back in Indiana when it comes to developers, when it comes to farmers. You know, and I would agree with Ms. Roos 100% if we were talking about 48 years ago. I know back then you couldn't fish in our local rivers because they were full of pollutants and hazardous waste material. I think you got to acknowledge that, and what I disagree with 100% is that the stewardship of landowners, the states themselves, have now had 48 years since the Clean Water Act to know what is best for their own properties and so forth. And I think the amount of regulations that have accumulated over time have swamped the system, so to speak. So I think this is a perfect pivot to where we will not forget about where we have come from, and that idea that only the federal government can be the steward that takes literally micromanagement, whether it's on the part of Mr. Gasser on his farm or Mr. Davis in his developments. I think this is a perfect time to kind of go the other way and not let up or forget any of the things that we've accomplished along the way. First question's for Mr. Davis. A couple developers that had to mitigate. I was shocked in terms of the dollar amount of the development when their alternative was a $2 million mitigation versus what ended up being a $200,000 mitigation. I'd like to hear some of the graphic things that you've run into along the lines of that. First of all, to know that from experts, there was a 90% difference in what a consultant said needed to be done to mitigate. If you could give us a few graphic instances like that, I think it would be good for the public to appreciate what you're up against.
Well, certainly, and thank you for the question, Senator. My mind goes to kind of two things. Number one, not only am I a developer, but I also do mitigation banks. And so, you know, the concept behind a mitigation bank is that you go and you find land that is in distress. It's of regional consequence. It's land that hasn't been taken care of, and that through enhancement, creation, and preservation, you lift the environment up and you create it back to the way it would have been kind of pre-industrial revolution, as it were. And when we do that, we create these mitigation banks. And then developers like your constituents will often buy credits from us. And part of the reason it's so expensive is, this goes to the second part of your question, I think, part of the reason it's so expensive is one of the banks that I did, about 1,000 acres, it took me 10 years and over $1 million just to create, enhance, and preserve wetlands. And so those dollars then have to bubble up to the cost of the mitigation credit. So that's the reason why these costs can be so egregious, as your constituents had recovered or had noticed. And then secondly, you know, the other thing I would say is it happens to us often when we're doing developments. The overreach that we experience from regulators interpreting the rule prior to the most recent clarifications is overwhelming. It's absolutely overwhelming. We spend hundreds of thousands of dollars with expert consultants in order to help us identify where the wetland line is. And even once we do, the regulators still pull it up the hill further. And when those impacts occur, we have to purchase these mitigation credits and do on-site conservation and preservation. And the cost just absolutely skyrockets. And then finally, that's the bottom line. That's the reason why we're struggling with housing affordability.
Thank you. Next question is for Mr. Gasser. Another reason to be hopeful that with this rule, we won't forget where we've come from. It was less than a year ago, we started a climate caucus within the Senate. I was proud to be the first Republican as a lifelong conservationist to do that. And we've actually got a bill that came out of the gate bipartisan, the Growing Climate Solutions Act, which basically is wanting to help farmers, ag and tree, to certify their ground to take advantage of voluntary and compliance markets that are out there. So, Mr. Gasser, my question would be for you, with this new rule, do you think you will still do the stewardship practices on your own farm, riparian buffers, grass waterways, or even further, modify your practices to sequester carbon and do some of the things that would be rewarded by this bill. Will this new adjustment from the Trump administration help you do that?
Well, thank you, Senator. And yes, farmers have always been innovative, and we have always been innovative on our farm, and that is not going to change. We really do love the land, and we want to do the best job that we can to protect our soil, clean our water, be more resilient, and address the severe weather issues that we continue to have and having more and more all the time. So, our practices aren't going to change. Our practice of innovation is not going to change. Our practices are changing. And just as an example, in the last 30 years for us, or 40 years, we built terraces and waterways early on, and then we transitioned to no-till 100%. And then 10 years ago, we began growing cover crops, we're over half our land in cover crops now, owned or rented. It doesn't matter. We do it because it's the right thing to do, and it makes sense. And farmers are going to continue to do that. And we have more and better technology all the time. We need to encourage that innovation and that adaptation, and we need to encourage our companies, and to help us with that. Our latest thing on our sprayer was exact apply, and each nozzle on our new sprayer shuts on and off at exactly the right time. There is basically zero overlap, and it's just one of the things that we do, and we will continue to do that if we're allowed to.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Senator Braun. Senator Carton.